Well, let's talk about this new feature on the show.
Go for it,
Yes.
John.
I was just thinking about how often we lately won't have all watched the same thing, and how nice it
Mhm.
is when we can talk about something that we've all seen. And sometimes it's hard to line that up with something brand new.
Mhm.
Um, and I thought, well, why don't we not have to? This time we happen to be starting off with something new. But in general, this can be anything where one of us is going to basically ask the other two, or demand it, require the other two to watch something, so that the next show we can all have seen at least one thing that's accessible to everyone. And we're going to try to announce it on the show a week in advance so that you out there can uh, watch the same thing. And when we do that segment, I know some people will say to me, oh, I would love to listen to your show, but I don't always know the movies you guys are talking about, and I want to see them before I hear people talk about them. And this is a way to know what we're talking about, and it's usually going to be something accessible. You could talk a little bit about where this week's selection is, but we're calling this required viewing. And Ronald, you're the first person who chose something, and you said, all right, pick a movie that's accessible and easy. I'll tell you what, I'll make John sign up for a 7-day free trial to a new service so he can watch a 6-episode limited series.
Yeah, so I think what's really important as a viewer of all things media is get your stuff from all over the place.
Yes.
And I'm typically looking at the American guides for like top TV shows of the year, but every once in a while, I'll scooch my vision over onto the UK charts. And one that kept coming up on a bunch of lists was The Responder, starring Martin Freeman.
You can
And
watch on BritBox.
you can watch from BritBox. Roku also has BritBox. Amazon, you can get it through Amazon Prime. Um, so it is accessible to Americans, and a free trial, you don't have to pay for it. So you sign up for it, get rid of it right after you watch it if you want to, or get into some Brit debauchery.
Or do
Watch
what
Gangs of
everyone
London
does: forget you signed up for it, and then pay for it every
and
month
get
without
charged for the
watching it
rest of your.
forever. Um, so there's a lot going on here. One thing is, I had not yet decided I was going to watch it, but I had seen a trailer and thought it looked pretty good. So when you mentioned it, I was like, yes, I'll happily watch that. But ads for this were seeping into my feed. I don't know if it's just because that's where my interests are, and the algorithm was throwing something in front of me. But it looked intriguing. I think Martin Freeman is one of my favorite. Legit one of my favorite actors, one of those people who I'm always kind of excited to see in something. And I do think there's a lot of goodwill from his performance as Tim on the original Office, that we all love him from that. But part of why we loved him on that was how believable he was. And he brings so much to just about every part I've seen him in. He does something kind of interesting and edgy with it, and he doesn't always play nice guys. I don't know, I just think he's an interesting actor. So this, when you mentioned it, it was like, yes, I'm happy to do this. And I also knew it would be an opportunity to check out some of the other things on BritBox. There's the Stephen Merchant playing a serial killer in The Barking Murders, is like a 3-episode series on
Oh,
BritBox
I'm gonna have to check that out.
I started watching it. I haven't really gotten into it yet, but there's a lot of good stuff that I'm going to be watching in this 7-day free trial period. Fuck you, BritBox.
Cool.
I'm not going to pay $6.99 a month for another service.
So yeah, man, I wanted you guys to watch it. It's a story about a cop, uh, affectionately known as a copper, and his beat, and he's tremendously affected by the job, to the point where, he's troubled, man. He's going through some PTSDs. Has some. When you meet him first, he's in therapy, and he may have lost a position, but you don't quite know why. And he is, what by all accounts, a dirty cop. And I'm not going to say why, but coupled with that is the idea that he is put into a position because of an accident where he has to help a new recruit that is very by the book. And he quickly tries to show this woman that that's not how the world works. And for 5 episodes, you go through this panic of a situation that goes from very small to very big very quickly, and affects everybody around this gentleman. So what you guys think of The Responder?
Steve, why don't you respond to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I mean, mainly because I really enjoyed Martin Freeman, and honestly,
Yeah.
the big some of the stuff that I enjoyed the most on the show, which is really not even at the core, excuse me, at the core story of it, was like it really stood out to me, like the relationship of the children in the show to their fathers, and
Oh yeah.
specifically Tilly, his Chris's daughter, Martin Freeman's daughter in the show. I don't know why, but like every episode, every scene that child actor is in, I mean, she was incredible in the show. I mean, she's not in it a lot, but when you talk about, a character that he's playing, he's this cop who is a dirty cop in ways, and just, stressed out. He's going to a therapist, he's on medications, and he's, did he actually say in the show? I think, is it just depression, or is it,
He said anxiety, I think.
Anxiety. Okay. Yeah. But just like seeing the bright spot in his life is literally his daughter is really, that's really, when he's having breakfast with her, when he's even just talking to her on the phone. And I don't know, I just really like that stood out to me, because the whole show is kind of about this like uphill battle that he's constantly charging against. And, because of the stress of the job, the stress on his marriage, other factors in his life that are just like completely just weighing him down and just destroying him emotionally and physically. But when he's around his daughter, it really stood out to me. And even the other character, I can't remember, like his friend in the show, like who also has a daughter, even his relationship with his daughter, the amount that we get to see of her, it's just, I don't know. I really like, what's that?
Carl. I think Carl was his name.
Yeah. The scenes where he's like watching a show with his daughter, and it's like she's old enough to, like his wife's like saying it's not appropriate, but then his wife's sitting there watching it. Just like there's levity and there's like kind of like a sweetness to those scenes, because the show, in general is really kind of grimy, and it's really kind of stressful and suspenseful at times. But I really, really loved just like that anchor of his daughter. And even it was really sad too, because like even at times when like she was asking, if she was what was wrong, like because she's so tuned into her father and probably to her mother as well. But it's just like he's the one that's really kind of visibly suffering in ways that are affecting his relationships all over the board. So like a kid like that, and it's kind of sad to even think about having a daughter, having children, it's just like thinking about like kind of how we come off to our kids and how much more in tune they are to us than we probably realize. So I like the way the show kind of didn't just say he had a family and showed a couple scenes of him with his family. Like it really kind of showed the impact of what he was going through and how it, what it had on his family. And yeah, I love that part of it. But in general, I thought the show was good. I mean, it's just like, I'd heard a lot of good things about it too. I'd seen a couple things in my feed on it, kind of promoting it. So I was kind of happy that you picked it. Maybe not so happy with how quickly we had to watch it, but
I'm so sorry about that.
But glad that I did get to watch it, because I had been planning to. So it kind of forced me to, which I appreciate. But yeah, I can see why apparently it's like a big hit overseas, and there's even talks of a second season. And yeah, he's just incredible. Like he's just such a good actor. Like you said, John, in everything he's in, whether it's funny or kind of straight, or just kind of like even this, like from not being a physically, intimidating presence, like he's not a big man. He's not, physically either in size or at height, anything like that. But in those scenes where he's kind of really kind of imposing intimidation, as this cop who's probably abusing his power, it's kind of scary because of that. But it's also just his presence is really the way, that's leveraged in this series. I thought was like really effective, and it kind of sort of showed a side of him that most people probably don't associate him with, which I think is another part of the appeal of the show, is probably reaching with people that have seen it and liked it. But yeah, I dug it. I mean, I feel like over the course of 5 episodes, and maybe jumps around back to story points a little too often here and there, kind of rehashing things. But enough was there for me to still enjoy it. What about you, Ronald?
I enjoyed it a lot. So what's interesting about it is it's shot in Liverpool. He's on the beat in Liverpool, and his partner Rachel who's played by Adelayo, is from Manchester, and they call her a Mank because she sounds a little more proper than everybody else that they're around. So it's interesting, I've kind of experienced some of that when I was there. It's like the idea, like, sure, racism exists, absolutely, but there's also like a lot of classism that goes like every place else, where things like that play into it, where fancier sounding people really aren't around people who sound like the people in Liverpool. And watching these relationships between some of the characters, and you realize that this guy has a lot more heart than she's heard about this guy. And watching the way that he handles people, it's like when I was growing up, that's some of the police officers were like that in our neighborhood. It was like, if somebody was drunk, it's like, sure, you could arrest that person, or you could understand that that person's stressed out. They don't really want to, they're trying to drink their problems away, and get them out of the street and help them. It's that kind of neighborhood policing is something that is kind of amazing. And I think that's what people are kind of getting from this as well. Like, neighborhood policing is an old phenomenon that it doesn't really exist in the same way that it does anymore. And
well, the name responder refers to the fact that first responder is his role, which may not sound like a big distinction, but when you think about what that means, is he's the guy sitting in the car waiting to get the call to go to the place to do the thing. So he does kind of have people that he sees on his beat, people that he knows. It's not quite the neighborhood cop, but I mean, it reminds me that The Wire used to talk about that, or used to show the distinction between, for McNulty anyway, that like when there was a season where he ended up kind of busted down to being a beat cop, but you saw that he was kind of enjoying it because he was walking down the street and talking to people sitting on their stoop and shit like that. And again, we don't really want to romanticize police work or what cops do these days, and I don't think The Wire was ever trying to do that, but I do think showing like the challenges of the job, it's still a legit interesting role that a person's trying to play. And I think the responder, honestly, it skirts that feeling of like, not cop worship, but it does, like, it is taking you down the road of, like you said, Ronald, starting with a cop who you just assume, like, all of your negative assumptions about policemen right now are coming to bear. And then you watch this show, and they do start to show you like the real person behind that, and you can decide how corrupt he is. But there's a way in which the show almost seems like it's kind of saying, see, he was right to do the things he did, but it's not that simple. And so it's just an interesting moral place that the show kind of puts you, because we aren't really in the mood for a hero cop story, and this is not that. But you do see that there's still some, like you said, Ronald, there's a legitimate attempt on his part to do what's best for the people that he comes into contact with. That maybe that's not to a person, but there's definitely people he has chosen to be like, I'm going to try to help this person because no one else will. And it doesn't always work out for him. It kind of reminded me of Breaking Bad, the sort of escalating tension aspect of like really spending time in this feeling of, oh shit, I've got to do this this has gotten more complicated. Now this person's gotten involved.
All without a gun.
It's funny. I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking about that watching this show. I feel like I was watching something before this that was a similar thing where I just realized, oh yeah, this is a British thing, so there's not going to be as likely to see people pulling a gun. But then watching this, I definitely thought about it. How many people would be dead on an American version of this show, just because American shows have to have that moment where someone's standing there and then they suddenly get shot. And whereas on this show, you have to actually walk over to them and hit them with a stick.
Or a hammer.
Or a hammer. And you can walk, and there's time to get away. If they're walking down a dark street and they have a hammer and you can see it, you've got time to like turn the car around and peel out. But no, you're right, Steve. There's a griminess. There's a griminess to this, and the sweaty quality. Martin Freeman. I don't think I've ever seen him play somebody it's not quite like the way your nerves feel watching Uncut Gems or something like that. But it is a very nervy feeling of just, I want him to settle some of this stuff and go home and get some rest. But yeah. One thing I want to say too, that like there's one little Tim moment that was an Office moment. Do you remember the moment where he's in the house with the dead woman, and I guess it's the coroner that shows up and says, "Is this her?" And Martin Freeman doesn't quite look at the camera, but he does stop. and kind of look up, and he almost does a Tim look at the camera of like, can you believe this asshole just asked me, is this her? But it's like, that was one of the only funny moments in the whole 6 episodes. But I was amazed at that fact that they did get a few little laughs in there, even though this is not a comic turn. And I'll say one other moment I really liked. I liked the guy at the desk. You're talking about like the reveal of different parts of the story. Why did he leave the force? We just assume he's corrupt. Then we find out the person that kind of drove him out may have had his own motivations. There's a scene where that guy's in the police station and he's talking to the desk sergeant or whatever they call it. Yeah. And the dispatcher or whatever. And that guy, the way he defends our lead character in that moment is something we haven't seen in the whole show up to that point. We haven't seen anybody really say, no, actually he's doing some good stuff as a cop. Like, I feel like those little moments feel like reveals, and it's one of the disadvantages maybe, Steve, is like you said, it's a little stretched out at 6 hours or close to it, 5 hours, but you do get little moments like that are allowed to breathe. And I think that's maybe the trade-off. But I made a note of a couple scenes like that where I was like, oh, this is that type of show where you have the little moments that are the kind of details, the kind of interpersonal stuff you were talking about, Steve, that just it makes it feel slightly different from something you've seen before. Because face it, we've seen a lot of cop shit. And you might say, why this? And, I think the feel and the kind of emotional depth of it is the real answer I would give to that.
Yeah, for sure.
I kept thinking Ian Hart was wearing a wig. The guy who plays Carl.
Yeah.
His hair was crazy.
He just looks older than his hair. And I kept thinking someone was going to like grab his wig and pull it off. But then I realized, no, that was never even a part. That wasn't even like, we weren't even supposed to think anything about it. That's just Ian Hart's
it's this
hair.
Wacky hair.
And I know that
he put his finger into a socket.
Yeah.
Like he just.
Or like he said, he went to a place and said, give me the Gene Wilder.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like.
It definitely.
And I know I really shouldn't talk, but
no, his hair is nuts, man. But yeah, The Responder is on BritBox. You can access it through Amazon Prime if you want, Roku, Apple TV. It's BritBox is a good service. So, and it's a 7-day trial if you want to watch a ton of British stuff, including Gangs of London, which is
yes, I noticed that whole series is on
a
there too, so.
masterpiece. So cool.